Hello and good morning to everyone. My name is Cicely Thompson. I'm at Northwest Fair Housing Alliance as an intake analyst and the equity and inclusion coordinator. I have my coworker with me, Shannon. Want to introduce yourself?
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Shannon Bedard, and I'm here as the Fair Housing Advocacy Director. Thank you. Okay.
All right, so let's get started. We have a PowerPoint for you all. It's pretty lengthy, but it's good information. So let's get started. Let me share my screen. I can't see everyone, so can someone chime in if they can see my screen okay?
Looks good, Cicely.
Okay, thank you. Okay, like we stated, we're Northwest Fair Housing Alliance. Today we are going to be covering for our agenda. We have 7 points we kind of want to highlight this morning, and we're going to do our intro. We're going to talk a little bit about protected classes and the overview of that, fair housing laws, covered properties and transitions, so we have a full understanding about that. Sex and sexual orientation and gender identity, we'll explain that further, along with the national origin in our newest protected class, immigration and citizenship status. We'll also take a look into disability and reasonable accommodations and modifications due to disability. And then we'll also look into a little bit familial status, and we will finish up with some questions over our presentations from you all. Our mission is to ensure equal housing opportunity for the people of Washington State through education, counseling, and advocacy. Northwest Fair Housing Alliance was founded in 1994, and we serve 17 counties on the eastern part of Washington. We have another fair housing agency on the west side that covers the rest of the state.
Right, that's in Tacoma.
Yeah, Fair Housing Center of Washington. So if anyone has any questions about the west side of the state, that's who you would want to call. They have jurisdiction over that area. And here is our wonderful team.
Small but mighty.
Okay, can everyone see my mouse? I'm circling Marley Hawkendonner as Executive Director right here. And then we have Sharo, he also goes by Sean, Assistant Director for Testing and Investigation right here. We have Alfred Butler, our Finance Manager right here. We have Glenda Mendoza Krieger. She's an Intake Analyst and Hispanic Outreach Coordinator. Oops, sorry. Hispanic Outreach Coordinator right here, so which is super helpful, bilingual. That's great. And we have Shannon Bedard, who's my co-host today, Fair Housing Advocacy Director. And then there is me, Cicely Thompson. We also have board members who is not pictured today, and we have testers as well. And our testers varies kind of different seasons. Some people are available a lot, in a season, and then not so much. So that kind of varies. And anyone can be a tester. So if anyone's interested in that, you can contact us after the presentation.
And we can tell them a little bit about what testers do while we're here. We utilize testers to support allegations of discrimination or determine if there is support for an allegation. So if someone alleges discrimination in housing, we might set up a test, which is, we kind of refer to them, layman terms would be like a secret shopper, to go and simulate a housing transaction. And we assign 2 different people with almost all the same characteristics except for the one variable we're testing for. And then we review their experiences because they write up a report on, they're given a script, they're told exactly what to say, and they do the housing transaction. And then we compare to see who was encouraged, discouraged, who was given which terms, which conditions of possible tenancy or loan or what have you. And then we can determine whether or not there is support in the allegation. So that's what testing is. And it's not a full-time paying gig or anything, but if you needed a little pocket money and you wanted to support civil rights, it would be an awesome thing to have you as a tester.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shannon. So now we are going to play a video called 7 Days. Let me exit my screen and get this loaded. This is going to be a little bit of background on how the Fair Housing Act came about.
Right. It should ground us really in what this work is about. So
can you
give us
still
some
see my screen?
Historical context. I'm still seeing the PowerPoint right now.
There you are. Okay. Can you see it now?
Still seeing the PowerPoint. There might be a delay though.
Yeah. Let me share the sound as well. How about now?
Okay, there we go. We just need it larger. Yeah,
Great.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Few in the nation believe that fair housing would in our time become the unchallenged law of this land. And indeed, this bill has had a long and stormy trip.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man.
Ladies and gentlemen, Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
The death of the prophet of nonviolence set off the worst outbreak of arson, looting, and criminal activity in the nation's history. Washington's ghettos burned within a few blocks of the nation's capital.
The life of a man who symbolized the freedom and faith of America has been taken. And no words of mine can fill the void of the eloquent voice that has been stilled. But this I do believe deeply. The dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has not died with him.
President Johnson was willing to speak up and say, we have to pass a fair housing bill.
Come on, Mr.
President? Yes, Dick. We're in trouble. We need some help. Yes? I was afraid of that.
Federal troops, for the first time since the Civil War, took up positions to guard government buildings.
Nothing's probably touchier than your own neighborhood and your own home or your own apartment. The administration, which supported the bill, said this has no chance. The other stuff is okay, but this will kill any politician that touches it.
Well, I just could not live beside them. I don't feel that they should be oppressed. But I moved here because it was a white community. I have 2 daughters and 2 sons. And if there's too many colored people around here, I definitely will get out. I think that, well, the property values will immediately go down if they are allowed to move in here in any number.
It seems as though our country is pulling apart into separate societies, where whites have jobs and Negroes have unemployment, where the middle class lives in suburbs and the poor are left in the ghettos, where one group of Americans looks upon another group of Americans with growing mistrust and even dread.
Then the bill went over into the House Rules Committee, and under the chairmanship of the famous Judge Smith, a right-wing segregationist from Virginia, he wouldn't hold hearings on it. He would take the bill home so nobody could act on it, and we were running out of time.
Thousands flowed through the rainy streets of Memphis this day, finishing a march that Dr. King planned to lead in support of striking garbage workers.
How many men must die before we can really have a free and true and peaceful society?
Of your presence, Lord. And I know you'll reach out and take mine. You'll take our hand.
The death of Martin Luther King is a tragic thing, but no legislation should be passed as a memorial to anyone.
In spite of the riots, I am going to support this legislation with all the vigor that I possess.
The laws that we pass up here are for all time. The Martin Luther Kings come and go.
The public reaction to this horror gave the sensible members of the committee a compelling argument that the House Rules Committee had to report that bill out. And I think that's how we got our bill. They just didn't dare bottle it up any longer.
And I have a dream that one day Negroes will be able to buy a house anywhere that their money will carry them.
At long last this afternoon, fair housing for all is now a part of the American way of life. Democracy's work is being done, and the bell of freedom rings out a little louder. We have come some of the way, not near all of it.
The fight still goes on because we unfortunately have the laws, but we don't have the enforcement. That we have changed, but we still have the same kinds of discrimination.
The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights said today that efforts by federal agencies to end housing discrimination have been generally superficial or incomplete.
President Carter has ordered federal agencies to use all means possible to strengthen fair housing programs.
For the first time, people with disabilities and families with children will be protected from housing discrimination.
President Reagan signed legislation today designed to toughen up the nation's fair housing laws.
Why did you take part in this demonstration today? Just because there was a huge crowd, or did you have any personal reason?
Well, I took part in this march today because of Martin Luther King and what he stood for, because this march is what he died for.
You know what he stood for?
Yes. He stood for nonviolence and peace for all men of all kinds. And I think if he died for it, I could carry out what he started.
Get the PowerPoint back up. Oops. Can you guys see the PowerPoint again?
Just needs to be full size.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Okay, so that was the 7 days video to give you guys some background of the Fair Housing Act and how it got started, how it came about. And we will reiterate a few of the things that we've seen in the film during this presentation, and refer back to the video in some ways.
Okay, so this is what we hear a lot. It's not fair. And we take inquiries from folks through the phone, walk-in, email, by mail, and oftentimes this is what they start with: it's not fair. And then we work with them by asking a lot of questions to sort of determine, is it something that's not fair? However, is it discriminatory, right? So something may not be fair, but it may also not be based in discrimination. So we're going to talk about the landlord-tenant laws and the Fair Housing Act. So over here on the left-hand side, we have landlord-tenant laws, right? And the housing providers can screen tenants and deny rental applications based on income, credit history, a negative rental history, maybe because of criminal background. And we've got source of income discrimination under there to point out to you that that discrimination is not within the Fair Housing Act, actually, nor is it under Washington state laws against discrimination. They passed that law and they housed it under regular landlord-tenant laws. So the remedy for that is legal action in court. So when we hear someone say, I've been discriminated against based on my source of income, whether that's they won't take my voucher or it says no vouchers accepted in the ad, something like that, we suggest calling Northwest Justice Project, which is a free legal aid service, because they're interested in those cases, and letting them know, what's the name of the place that's doing this? Do you have a screenshot of the ad? Anything like that to support your allegation. And common concerns under landlord-tenant that we hear about often are, repairs not getting done, security deposits not being returned, landlords entering without notice, that sort of thing. And we have to articulate, is this happening to everyone at the place? So if someone calls and says, it's not fair, my repairs aren't getting done, right? Well, what about your neighbors? Do your neighbors get their repairs done in their units? Are you kidding? Nobody gets repairs done around here. This place is a slum. This is a slumlord. Okay, so then it's not discrimination based, right? It's unfortunate and it does feel terrible and it's not a great way to run your business, but it's equally opportunity slumlord, essentially, right? Everyone's being allowed to experience this terribleness. So again, fair housing's on the right-hand side. That's the federal law, and it protects people because of their characteristics. So sometimes there's overlap and sometimes there's not, and we have to sort out what's landlord-tenant and what actions do you take under landlord-tenant laws and redirect someone. Other times we have to determine by comparisons whether it might be because of a protected class. If someone refuses to rent to you, if you're treated differently, if you're being harassed based on your protected class, if your tenancy is being terminated for a protected class reason, or if you've asked for an accommodation and it's been denied, an accommodation based on a disability related need. So we operate on the right-hand side, and the remedy for that allegation would be to file a complaint with the federal government, with HUD, Housing and Urban Development, or with the state, Washington State Human Rights Commission, and you would be alleging that the housing provider or in the housing transaction, your civil rights were violated. Okay, so that's a very complicated complaint. That's not like you a one-stop, fill out a complaint card, drop it in the box to the manager and go on with your life. It's a much more complex, long, drawn out process. But our services are to help you navigate that process, and our services are free. So cases that go to HUD or to the state can last anywhere from approximately, I'd say short would be 6 months to a year. I've had cases go as long as 7. It's not ideal. And if instead you opt for the other alternative, you can go to civil court or get an attorney and file a lawsuit. In each case, you have 1 year from incident if you're filing with HUD or the Washington State Human Rights Commission. You have up to 2 years from incident to go to civil court. Now, the remedy with attorney in civil court is, if you can afford to do such a thing, or if you can find an attorney who will do it based on this, the allegation and the evidence there and whether they think they can prevail. So our remedy is to file with HUD and the state, and our services, like I said, are free. And it's something that, is going to take a little while. It's not going to solve your immediate housing problem. But it's very important that if you do believe that this is occurring or has occurred or about to occur to you, that you document things so that we have enough evidence, because as a complainant in this kind of complaint, you have the burden of proof. Okay, so you want to have as much to show that there's enough evidence to support your allegation. There's texts, there's maybe phone messages that have been left on your phone, there's emails, maybe you have witnesses, things like that. So under landlord tenant, you have to go to Northwest Justice Project. But if you believe it's for a protected class, you would give us a call and we would help you sort that out and talk to you about what occurred and what kind of evidence you need in order to prevail. Okay.
Great.
Okay, so discrimination, that's the definition up there, right? The unfair prejudicial treatment of people and groups based on characteristics. And it stems from these types of things: stereotypes, prejudices, biases that are conscious or unconscious, and assumptions that people have about other people that are taken as true without any kind of proof. They tend to be fixed ideas or expectations. They're generally not on actual experiences. They're based on attitudes and social premises. And in overt ways, it results in things like slurs, racial epithets, name calling, disparaging comments, descriptions, and possible harassment. in a much more concealed, and this is more common, it could be exclusion, access limitation, maybe steering or different terms and treatment, denying reasonable accommodations, and or retaliation for having exercised your fair housing rights. Okay. So we saw in that video, it said 50 years, but we've now actually come to 55 years of the Fair Housing Act, so 1968 to today. And it prohibits the discrimination in the sale, rental, or financing. So housing transactions, oftentimes you'll see we refer to tenants because that's who we hear from the most. But this could happen if you were attempting to buy a home. This could happen if you were trying to get a loan. This could be predatory lending, right? This could be a large scale kind of operation that's not just a one-off, that's targeting particular demographics for poor loan products. So it's any housing related transaction, and it's protection based on the 7 protected classes. And down below, you'll see this is about dwellings. So they defined dwelling as well. And it's building, structure, or portion thereof intended for occupancy by one or more families, and any vacant land that's also intended for that purpose. Okay. So when you see that equal housing sign, that's what we're about, equal housing opportunity. So that's where the fair gets a little bit muddy and obscure. But when you say equal opportunity housing, like equal opportunity employment, and people go, ah, I got it. Okay, I got it. That's what you do. Okay. Do you want to go on this one, Cicely?
So who must comply with the Fair Housing Act? We have a list on the side here. It's not exhaustive of the list, but you see at the top owners and landlords, real estate agents and brokers, property management companies, maintenance purchase, housing counselors, mortgage brokers. Like Shannon was saying, it could be a big corporation, lenders, other tenants, developers, shelters and transitional housing. So we get quite a bit of calls about that as well. Condo association and homeowner associations. So everyone essentially must comply to Fair Housing Act. We do have some exceptions, which is the Miss Murphy exemption. If you own 4 or fewer units and live in one of the 4, then you don't have to comply to the Fair Housing Act and like essentially granting reasonable accommodations for another tenant in your building. But 4 units or fewer, and you have to be living in one. The other one is a single family dwelling. And if all of these are met, then you are exempt. So owns 3 or less single family housing. Dwelling is sold or rented without the use of a real estate broker or agent. And there has been no violation of Section 804 of the Fair Housing Act, so discriminatory statement and advertising.
Right. No one's exempt on the advertising.
Yes.
If you were to advertise in a discriminatory way, you lose your exemption.
So covered housing transactions, like Shannon mentioned earlier, so we have sales, rentals, financing, homeowner renter insurance, appraisals, brokerage services, and design and construction. So it's covered in all of these transactions.
And they do, interestingly enough, testing on all of those types of transaction too. So I've been a tester for the National Fair Housing, and I was assigned to test based on insurance. And they would give me a profile, tell me what kind of house I was buying, where it was located. You know, they'd send me pictures of the property. I'd get to know, be really familiar of it. And then they're assigning another tester some other property. And I don't know what they're testing for because they don't tell me as a tester, right? They don't tell me, is this national origin? Is this gender, sex? You know, is this race-based test? We don't know. and we pretend to go through the housing transaction to try and get insurance for this property. And then they compare the tests. So that's another way to do testing, is through remote, actually, even. Okay.
Yeah. So now we're going to shift a little bit into the 7 federally protected classes. And it's a group of people with common characteristics who are legally protected from housing discrimination on basis of that characteristic, which we see in the 7 in the video. So now we're going to go through each of them here. So the first 4 that was rolled out in 1968 that you guys seen after the assassination, 7 days after the assassination of MLK, the 4 main ones, the first ones were race, color, and skin tone, religion, national origin, so ethnicity and heritage. And after that, the Fair Housing Act was amended to include, in 1974, was sex. And then in 1988, we had disability added and familial status. And these are largely promoted from movements during these times in society. Women's rights were in 1974, a real big push, a real big movement that was happening. And this evolved from that. So on and so forth with disability and familial status eventually was covered from other movements in society, and then added under the Fair Housing Act. Shannon, you want to talk about this one? And
sure. Yeah. What's exciting about the Fair Housing Act is, the interpretation of the law. What changes over time is, what did they mean when they said sex, for example? And there's been an argument since they added sex in 74. What did that cover? Did it only cover women? Did it cover men? Did it cover, who did it cover? And what kinds of activity did it cover? So just the most recent expansion here, oops, I hit something. Did it change? Okay, no, it's okay. The recent expansion was that they've decided that based on employment law, because oftentimes the Fair Housing Act looks to employment law for trends or guidance. And there was this case, Bostock versus Clayton County, and they determined in that case that workplace discrimination based on sex included, as an umbrella, basically, sexual orientation and gender identity. So looking to that, the Fair Housing Act then decided that the provisions are comparable, and to those that ban sex discrimination in employment, if it bans it in employment, then it's going to be in housing. And in February 2021, under Biden, they issued this executive order saying, we will now hear cases alleging LGBTQ and gender identity discrimination in fair housing under sex. So they didn't add another protected class, right? They didn't add number 8. They kept it at 7, but said sex would now expand to recognize orientation and gender identity. And that's just in 21. Now, we'll talk about Washington State in that, but now when I say activities, what activities does this include? Well, so just as in the workplace, it could be about stereotyping. In housing, what we hear as an example would be of sex stereotyping would be, well, we're happy to rent to all female roommates. That's okay, but not all male roommates, because we know that's just a recipe for disaster, right? That's going to be messy, parties, wild. The gals, they'll just be gentle and taking care of everything. Or maybe it could be, we'd love to rent this property to you. However, we really believe there needs to be a man in the household because there's a lot to take care of here on the grounds. Okay, that could be stereotyping. Harassment is a no-no. Sexual harassment in housing comes in 2 different definitions. There's quid pro quo, which means this for that, right? It's an exchange. So I will forgive that late rent fee. I will move you up the wait list. I will allow you into the shelter. I will not evict you if you do this for me. And then the other would be hostile environment. And hostile environment, just like the workplace, similar in its, texting, sexting, trying to unwanted advances, distasteful sexually based jokes, that sort of thing. The really poignant thing here about the sex harassment is that different than sexual harassment at the workplace, when you're at work, it's terrible. That's awful. You shouldn't be experiencing that. However, you get to go home and get away from it, right? You might be able to change jobs and get away from it. But sexual harassment in your home, where do you go? Can you easily move? You want to uproot the kids from school? Well, it's terrible. Your harasser potentially could have the keys to your house, the master keys. So that is a real frightening and very stressful situation to investigate and hear complaints on. And oftentimes it is women of particular class, race. They have very few resources, and they oftentimes don't have very many other options or are compromised in some other way, like maybe they're perceived to not be here lawfully, etc. So that's part of fair housing. The way it touches on, you see survivors of domestic or intimate partner violence, it touches on that in a very narrow capacity. Generally, it's when someone's trying to get access to housing, and they have been a survivor of a domestic violence situation, and they're being told this is a zero tolerance crime community. If you have any history of domestic violence whatsoever, we're not going to allow you to live here because, you just bring that stuff with you and we don't want it here, and you're just going to let them back in and all this stuff, right? So it comes at that time of trying to enter housing, or the contrast, it comes at the time of the incident when the person is housed, but they've been targeted in an incident, and now they're all as an entire group or a family being kicked out, despite the fact that they're the victim of the violence. So now if someone's a victim of domestic violence and they report that to the housing provider, as long as they are able to follow the lease, pay the rent, and be part of the community, they should be allowed to stay. The housing provider certainly can take action to bifurcate the lease, no trespass the violator, and have them leave the property, right? But the family or the target of the violence shouldn't be excluded from housing or evicted. Oftentimes there's an assumption that, oh, well, he's the main breadwinner. If we kick him out, she's not going to be able to pay rent. Until that rent goes unpaid, not your concern as a housing provider. Don't make that assumption, right? So this comes down to oftentimes that very narrow little tiny window of where someone is maybe trying to make the conversion from the bad situation. They're maybe in a shelter and it becomes known that they're in a shelter, or it becomes known that they have a protective order, or maybe they've even told the housing provider, I'm trying to leave a domestic violence situation, and then the housing provider discriminates. Now, that's not to say that we don't have people who experience intimate partner violence that are men, or that we don't have same-sex partner violence. The reason this enters into fair housing is based on a statistical analysis that women are disproportionately impacted by domestic violence. So if you have a policy, in your housing that says no, absolutely no criminal history based on X, Y, and Z or crime-free property, it may have a disproportionate impact on women and keep women out. As for gender identity and sexual orientation, we hear of those cases. Sometimes it'll be me and my spouse applied for a place and the landlord kept saying, didn't we need a 2-bedroom? And we wanted a 1-bedroom. And they kept, oh, you want a 1-bedroom? Whoa, okay, never mind. So it could be that they, a real or perceived gender identity or sexual orientation. If someone is perceived gender identity, the way we hear about it is sometimes someone applies and then their ID doesn't match the name that and the sex that they're presenting as, and suddenly deals off, no housing transaction anymore. Or maybe it's once somebody is in place and is housed, they transition and now the landlord's like, whoa, you got to go. This is upsetting to the community. And we haven't got some of these cases currently, but what we're anticipating is, just like any other social trend we see out there, that it's going to be parents and entire families treated poorly based on their youth and their gender identity or their LGBTQ plus status. So it might be that the youth comes out or transitions and suddenly, the whole family's being terminated.
Mm-hmm.
Or not allowed to live in a community. Your family, you got that different kind of family makeup and that won't really fly in this community. We might be uncomfortable here. And we had a case similar like this north of here with an entire neighborhood that didn't want a family to move in because they were a family of 2 dads and they had a large group of children they were caring for. And the whole neighborhood actually gathered together and wrote a bunch of letters saying, this is a single family residential zone. This is not for business. This is not for, you're running a foster business. You're running a foster home. And we had to push back on that. And, you got to wonder if it was if it had been a heterosexual family with this size of group of kids in the family, would they ever have even been pushed on in any way? But we ended up getting them. They had already sold one house, and the new house, didn't have any occupancy standard problems. It was an enormous house in an enormous cul-de-sac, and we got them housed.
All right. Well, thank you, Shannon, for explaining that thoroughly to everyone. That can be quite confusing sometimes, especially when they start doing the expanding of things. So it's always good to really dive into those things. So now what we're going to do is look at the Washington state protected classes. So we had the 7 federal protected classes. So the 7 federal protected classes are any state you go to, you have protection in those 7 federal classes. Each state varies in what they protect. And so we have 4 additional ones in Washington state, and we are going to go through that now. Can anyone list any of them? Anyone want to unmute and throw some ideas out? All right.
Veterans.
Veterans, thank you. Anyone else?
There was also a comment in the chat that says, isn't gender identity one in Washington State?
All right.
Awesome. Yes, it is.
Familial status?
What status?
The familia, the family status,
Family status.
religion.
That's in the 7. That's in, we have 4 additional ones.
Oh,
So
the 4 additional ones. Okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But you're correct for the federal protected classes. Okay.
Disability.
Disability is in one of the 7 as well. Okay, the 4 additional ones for Washington State is marital status, divorced, widowed, or separated.
Darn it.
That's
what I was thinking.
That's what you're gonna say. Yeah, we know. Sexual orientation and gender identity. Veteran military status. Someone said that one. Honorably discharged.
Mark got that. Mark knew that one. He's at the Goodwill.
He's at the okay. And our newest one is immigration citizenship status. So along with the 7, for Washington State has 4 additional ones. So if you travel out of the state and you need protected classes, you want to make sure that what their additional protected classes are for each state, because they're not all the same.
Right, right. So Washington recognizes the original 7. Nobody can't recognize the initial 7, right? Like Cicely said, in the whole United States, no matter which state you go, those original 7, they're fixed.
Race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability and family status.
Yeah.
They're fixed. And these 4 Washington.
So if you go over the border to Idaho, you won't see these 4. Which this is very important to point out, because what did we talk about? When was gender identity and sexual orientation recognized under sex at the federal level? Just in 2021. Okay, so Washington State had this well before that, but that only protected people in Washington. Now at the federal level, if you're in Idaho and there's no LGBT protection in housing, there is now, because it's recognized under sex at the federal level, even if it's not recognized at the state level, and the feds trump the state.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You take this one, Shannon?
Sure. So additionally, Washington law, again, we're ahead of the feds. Just like we were ahead of the feds with LGBTQ and gender identity stuff, we're ahead of the feds in expanding race to include a characteristic of hairstyle, protective hairstyle traits, right? That have historically been associated or perceived to be associated with particular races, Native American, African American, etc. So twists, braids, locks, afros, those are protected as employment law. They are protected, right? But Washington State has added it into an under race within housing. Okay. So this is not protected at the federal level. If you were believing that you were denied housing based on having a trait like the braids, locks, and twists, you would file a complaint with Washington State Human Rights Commission, right? Because that's who recognizes this protection. Okay. National origin, you know, national origin can be where someone